Hi, it's Steve Gale here. In this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate building a Industry 4.0 test server using Ubuntu Linux. So what we're doing first of all is go to the GitHub site, which is here, and the instructions for building the server are in the readme.md file. So what I'll do is I'll be following these instructions. I'll just make the instructions a little bit smaller. There we go. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create our Ubuntu server in Oracle VirtualBox, and we're going to use 1804.4. So I'll start by creating a new virtual machine. I'll call it i40 demo. And it's going to be a Linux Ubuntu 64. And I'll give it 4 gig of RAM. And I'll create the new virtual hard disk, but I need to increase the size from 10 gig to 40 gig. So I'll create that. I'll create it as a VDI, and I'll let it be dynamically allocated in terms of size. So the size will grow up to a maximum of 40 gig. So here's where I change it from 10 gig to 40 gig. And I'm going to specify the location here. So I'll just choose a location for it. External storage. Can sit in here. And I'm happy with that location. And we'll create that. Okay, so the next thing I need to do in settings is I need to attach the storage. So what I need to do is attach the storage to my Ubuntu ISO, which I've already downloaded. I'm going to use Ubuntu Desktop for this demo test, mainly because for a test server, it's more convenient to use Ubuntu Desktop. But in deployment to the final server, we'd be using Ubuntu Server 1804.4. So I'll choose Ubuntu Desktop and OK. And then I will start the install. So I'll install Ubuntu in English and continue. I want to do a normal installation, and I can download updates. Erase disk and install, that's fine, because all it's doing is it's erasing the virtual disk, which I've set up for the VDI file. And it'll just say it wants to continue with that, so we'll continue. And we're in Melbourne, so we'll continue from there. My name is Steve. And this can be Steve VirtualBox demo. I'll set a password. And continue. And we're copying files. So we've finished copying files now, and now we're on to installing the system. So you can see that the Ubuntu system is now being installed. So the installation has now completed. What we'll do is we'll do a restart. So I'll press enter to remove the boot media, and the Ubuntu VM will fire up. So now I'll log in with the username and password that I set up during the install. And what I'll do is I'll move this screen over to this side, over here. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to, I'll just go through the what's new. We'll clear it out of the way. No, I don't want to send data to Canonical. And we're done. So the first thing I want to do is open up the terminal, which is in the second window. Terminal. And I'll add it to my favorites. Okay. So now that we've done the install, the first thing we need to do is to do an apt-get update and apt-get upgrade and make sure that we're running the latest version. I'll use the password that I did the install with. Okay, so now I'll do the upgrade. And I'll say yes to the install. This will take a while, so I'll just pause the video for a sec. So now the upgrade is completed. So the next thing we want to do is to install the 1804 guest editions. And to be able to do that, we need to, first of all, execute this command. And so I'll execute this command. So it's sudo apt install build essential dkms Linux headers dash dollar open bracket uname -r close bracket. I'll say yes to that. Okay, so now that that's completed, now what we'll do is we'll do a reboot, and that'll give us the ability to install the guest editions. Okay, so I'll log in after my reboot. Oops. going to let me in? Yes. So to install the guest editions, what I need to do is go into Devices, insert Guest Editions CD image, and run it. Use my password, authenticate. So now the guest editions is completed, so I'll just press return, and it wants me to do an update, so I'll just say remind me later. So what I'll do is I'll just do a sudo update. And upgrade. Say yes to that. So I'm doing the update manually because if we're running a server, that's what we'd be doing. We'd be doing it manually. Okay, so now that update's done, yet another reboot. And after that, the guest edition should be installed. Actually, before I do the reboot, what I might do is I might just go into Devices and I'll allow for the shared clipboard and drag and drop bidirectional as well. And then the reboot. And hopefully when it comes back, I'll be able to copy and paste. Okay, so I've just logged in after the reboot. So let's run the terminal command. The next thing we want to do is we want to install Git. We're going to use Git to grab all of the or clone this repository, which has all of the code for the Industry 4 project in it. So what we want to do is we want to use Git to essentially clone this repository initially, and then after that we'll use Git to continually manage any updates. So we'll have our master code will be located in GitHub, and we'll pull from there any changes, and then we can update those changes back into the server. So first, before I do this, I need to install Git. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can copy and paste here. So I'll try and copy here and paste into there, and yes, I can. So the guest editions have obviously installed correctly. So let's install Git. And yes to that. Okay, so now that Git's installed, the next thing we'll do is we'll have a look at our IP address. So I'm going to check the IP address just by using IPA. And I should have, because we're using NAT networking, if you look at the machine settings here, initially in the network we've used NAT networking. So we'll change to bridged later, but at the moment, because we're using NAT, it's just very convenient for accessing the internet for all the updates and things that we need to do. I should have an IP address on my local network. So if I do an IPA, and you can see here that in the virtual network adapter, which is here, I've got a network address of 10.0.2.15, which is my local network address, which is my NATed network address inside of VirtualBox. Okay, so we get another update. Now we shouldn't get any more changes here, but we'll just run another one. Follow the instructions. Followed by yet another upgrade. Shouldn't be any packages to upgrade. There's not, so we're up to date. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to clone the repository. So we're going to clone this repository here. And we're going to do that using this command here. So I'll copy that. So when I clone the repository 2020 i40, what it does, I'm doing this from my home directory. So if I do cd home, you can see that I'm in my home directory. If I do an ls-l, what you'll see now is we've created a folder called 2020 i40. And inside of that, if I cd 2020 i40 and do an ls-l, what I'll see is I'll see the folder structure that I've got from my Git repository. So basically, what we've done is we've cloned this repository and we've got this folder structure on our local server, which is what we want. So the other thing is, if you're going to be using Git, then you probably want to configure it up with your details. So the next thing we'll do here is we'll configure Git. So I'll just do a git config -- list, and that'll show me the current Git configuration. But what I want to do is I want to add in my username and my email address. So my username will be not Bill Smith. It'll be Steve Gale. And my user email is my email in. So now I'll do a git config -- list again to make sure that those values are in there correctly and they look good. Okay, so now I'll do a cd ... back to my home directory. The next thing I want to do is I want to install Visual Studio Code, because Visual Studio Code is going to be the IDE that we're going to use for editing any changes in the code for this project. So to do that, the easiest way is to go and download it from the web. So what I'll do is I'll go and download Visual Studio Code for Linux, and I'll download the latest deb package. And this is where I want to be. Might make this a bit bigger actually. That's better. And we want the current .deb file 64-bit. So this is the current version here, and I'll save this file. That'll save it into the downloads folder. You can see it coming down now. So if I go back to my terminal window, and here I'm in $cd just to make sure, my home. If I go cd to downloads, and I do an ls in here, you can see here, here's the downloaded file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that. Actually, no, before I do that, what I'll do is I'll copy this. And then I'll copy this. And now it's installing Visual Studio Code. So sudo apt install --code, blah, 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 whatever the version is that you currently download. This will be the current version that's being downloaded. Okay, now that Visual Studio Code's been downloaded, what I'll do is I'll change directory .. go back to 2020 i40. Now, I'm now in the root level of the cloned repository. So if I do code dot, what should happen is that should fire up Visual Studio Code using the current folder as the Visual Studio Code loaded folder. And you can see here we've got 2020 i40. And I might just make this full screen for a minute, so it's a bit easier to see. And you can see here's our code structure here. So let's just take a quick look. We've been working through the readme.md file. So where we're at the moment is install VS Code, and we're basically at this point here. Some other folders we've got. We've got a PHP folder with some basic PHP code, which is used to basically to set up the database for the application server, and also to insert data from the sensors, the remote sensors. We've got this PyCom test folder in here. We've got the code for the sensors. Let's get rid of these. This is the boot.py, which is basically wireless LAN connectivity, and the main code, which reads the sensors, both the temperature and the humidity sensor, sets up the address of the local machine, which we'll need to change that for our to make sure our address is correct. And then based on those temperature value and humidity values, what it will do is it will format that data into a into JSON format. Then it will then format the data into another JSON string with the humidity value and temperature value, and then it'll do a HTTP post to insert JSON REST data PHP, which is this file here. We'll look at the contents of these files in more detail a bit later on. We've also got an SQL folder which has some SQL code to create the database, create a database table, create a user, and also to insert some dummy data if we don't have a sensor device handy. We've got a Ubuntu config folder which has static IP configurations or examples of static IP configurations that you can use to set up static IP for your test server. We've got a Tkinter folder which is for looking at data analysis, but that's later on. We've also got another data analysis folder as well using Jupyter Notebooks. We'll look at that later on as well. And SH. Now the SH folder is really interesting, really important, because basically what we have here is deployment scripts. So these deployment scripts, because this code, particularly the PHP code, is currently sitting in my user area. So what the deployment scripts do is they create a route for the application server, the PHP application server, and under var www.html, which is the root of the Apache web server. Then what they do is they deploy everything that's in the PHP folder into that Apache root folder, and change the ownership of all of the files in that folder structure to www.data and the group www.data, which is the Apache service. Now this change ownership is recursive, and the copy is recursive as well. So every file and folder under PHP will be sent into this i40 test and so forth. But before we can use these deployment scripts, they need to be made executable. So one of the things that we need to do is to change these to be executable so that we can deploy the code to our application server. But before we do that, we need to actually install the application server, which is the next thing that we will do. So I'll just restore back to here. So as you can see, the next step is to install Apache PHP MySQL and PHP MyAdmin. And what we'll do is we'll look at that in the next video.